In analyzing the transformation of Walter White into the ruthless drug lord Heisenberg, there is a commonly accepted theory. It states that the cancer diagnosis and subsequent events simply remove the shackles from the man Walt had always been deep down. This version, similar to a story from Fight Club, suggests that Heisenberg was a whole, suppressed personality that finally broke free. I believe this is a dangerous oversimplification that overlooks a much more disturbing truth, but there is one theory that shows that Heisenberg is not a hidden self. Heisenberg is an artificial construct, an empty shell that Walter White methodically and scrupulously assembled, like a mosaic, from fragments of the personalities of those he destroyed. I suggest you look at this case from a different angle. Walt does not unleash a monster, he builds one from scratch. The true horror of his fall lies not in who he was, but in his ability to transform into a psychological void. As he rides himself of his own morality, he has to fill the resulting abyss with something. This investigation will present evidence that Walter White acted as a collector, whose transformation was not an act of self-realization, but a series of acts of psychological absorption. Let's look at the evidence. It all started with the first murder, Domingo Crazy 8 Molina. This event became the original sin that breached Walter White's psychological integrity. It is important to note that this was not an impersonal, long-distance elimination. Walt spent several days with Crazy 8 locked in Jesse's basement. He tended to his prisoner, talked to him, shared a beer and personal stories. He established a human connection with him, which made the subsequent murder an act of deep personal trauma. During one of these conversations, Walt brings Crazy 8 a sandwich. The prisoner tears off the crusts, and Walt notes this with surprise. He asks,
"You don't like the crust?"
This moment of human connection, this insignificant everyday detail, becomes key. After Walt strangles Crazy 8 in agony with a bike lock, we observe him in his own kitchen. He makes himself a sandwich, and before eating it, takes a knife and methodically cuts off the crusts. This is not a one-time act. Later, we see that it becomes his permanent habit. I believe this action goes beyond a simple manifestation of guilt or a tribute.
May I have your attention, please? As all of you know, last week our city suffered a terrible tragedy.
This is the first documented case of absorbing a trait. The habit of cutting off the crusts is the first exhibit in his gruesome collection, the first fragment of someone else's personality that he has appropriated. It is a subconscious ritual born from the trauma of his first murder. It is a tangible scar that he will carry with him to the end. It is this seemingly insignificant detail that establishes the modus operandi for his entire subsequent transformation. This is the starting point from which the construction of Heisenberg began. The destruction of Gus Fring was a turning point for Walt. It was the transition from a common criminal to a contender for the throne of a drug empire. Killing Gus was not just the elimination of a competitor, but an act of usurpation. To take his place, Walt had to not only take over his business, but also, as the evidence shows, part of his personality. Here we see both conscious imitation and something much more sinister. Some of these borrowings were conscious. For example, Gus Fring, a man who valued anonymity, drove an inconspicuous 1998 Volvo FI-70 station wagon. It was the perfect car for his philosophy, which he once voiced to Walt. Even Hank Schrader, a DEA agent, commenting on Gus's car, says,
"See that Volvo station wagon over there? I mean, the guy drives a 10-year-old Volvo. It's brilliant."
Recall the flash forward at the beginning of the 5th season. Walt, now on the run under a new name, drives an old boxy Volvo 240. He didn't just choose the same brand. He adopted the very idea, the very symbol of Gus's restrained, understated power. Walt consciously puts on the mask of his defeated enemy, playing a role. But there is another, stranger example, which is perhaps the most compelling piece of evidence in the entire case. In the episode Salud, while in Mexico, Gus poisons himself and the entire cartel. Afterwards, he goes to the bathroom. There, all alone, he neatly folds a towel, places it on the floor, and kneels on it to vomit. The key point, Walt never saw this. He could not have seen it. Now let's jump to the episode Blood Money. Walt is nauseous after a chemotherapy session. He goes into the bathroom and does the exact same thing. He neatly folds a towel, places it on the floor, and kneels on it. The cinematography in these two scenes is intentionally repetitive, using the same camera angles to emphasize the parallel. Since Walt could not have known about this ritual, its repetition cannot be explained by conscious choice or learned behavior. This proves that the process of absorption is much deeper. By killing Gus and taking his place, Walt absorbed a part of his essence, his meticulous, methodical, almost obsessive-compulsive nature. He is not just imitating Gus, he is becoming him on a fundamental subconscious level. If the absorption of Gus was about adopting an image and power, in the case of Mike Ehrmantraut, Walt takes his professional tools: pragmatism, authority, and even his words. Mike's murder is one of the most senseless in the series, committed solely because of Walt's wounded ego. And perhaps that is why he clings so tightly to Mike's legacy, trying to wear the armor of a man he both respected and hated. The evidence, again, lies in the details. There's a telling scene in a bar in the 4th season. Mike orders a whiskey on the rocks. Walt, sitting next to him, pointedly asks for his drink. Neat.
Another round for him and I'll have the same, no ice.
This moment clearly establishes their difference. Now let's fast forward to the episode Gliding Over All, which comes right after Mike's murder. Hank offers Walt a drink at his house. He pours whiskey and says,
Rocks, right?
Rocks, yes.
and Walt silently agrees. The habit has been assimilated, but the most blatant is the theft of a signature phrase. In one conversation, Mike gives Walt advice in his weary, no-nonsense tone.
Do yourself a favor and learn to take yes for an answer.
Time passes, Walt kills Mike, and in the same episode, Gliding Over All, he is negotiating with a nervous Lydia. To calm her down and assert his authority, he looks at her and says Mike's exact words.
Lydia, learn to take yes for an answer.
Note, he doesn't just repeat the phrase, he copies Mike's intonation.
Learn to take yes for an answer.
His weary, businesslike manner. Walt steals Mike's verbal and behavioral tools. He uses them to appear as someone he is not, an experienced and cold-blooded professional. It is a verbal trophy that he displays to reinforce his new status. The phenomenon of absorption is not limited to those Walt kills with his own hands. It also extends to those for whose deaths he bears a heavy, indirect responsibility. This proves how pervasive and obsessive this trait of his has become. Pay attention to his appearance. After Walt allows Jane to die of an overdose, her grief-stricken father, air traffic controller Donald Margolis, becomes an indirect cause of the Wayfarer 515 plane crash. Shortly after this tragedy, Walt, who had previously been either clean-shaven or had a mustache, grows a goatee, exactly the same kind worn by the grieving Donald. It is a physical manifestation of his guilt, which he wears right on his face. In a bar shortly before Jane's death, Walt accidentally meets Donald. Not knowing who is in front of him, Walt shares his worries about Jesse, whom he calls his nephew. He asks a rhetorical question.
I mean, what do you do with someone like that?
To which Donald, full of paternal wisdom and pain, replies,
Family. Can't give up on them. Never.
The irony is that Walt will ignore this very advice in the most brutal way. But the most tragic and symbolic trophy in his collection is a family ritual. In the pilot episode, for Walt's 50th birthday, Skylar arranges the number 50 on his plate with veggie bacon. On his 51st birthday, while in a state of deep depression and fear, she repeats this ritual with the number 51, but does so with visible disgust. Walt assures her,
Life is good, Skylar.
but she sees the truth. Now, recall the cold open of the 5th season. We see a future Walt, exiled, with a new name, in a Denny's diner on his 52nd birthday. He is alone, and he takes real pork bacon and arranges the number 52 himself. Walt killed his family life, destroyed his family, and now he is forced to perform its rituals alone, like a ghost at his own feast. The switch to real bacon symbolizes his complete break with his old life and the acceptance of his new, ruthless essence. But the act itself is the absorption of his family's ghost, a bitter reminder of what he destroyed. To understand the uniqueness of Walter White's psychology, it is necessary to compare him with other well-known figures. Compare him, for example, with Hannibal Lecter. Hannibal is a predator of the highest order. His evil is innate, fully formed, and unchanging. He does not need to absorb others' traits because he is already perfect in his monstrous nature. He is a force of nature. Walter White does not fit this profile. He is not born evil. His case is unique. He is a psychological parasite who empties himself to fill the vacuum with the traits of those he consumes. His evil is not a static state, but a cumulative process. He is terrifying not for who he is, but for who he becomes. A patchwork man, a collection of ghosts. The evidence presented paints a clear picture. Walter White's transformation is not the revealing of a hidden essence, but a process of erasure and replacement. His legacy is not a methamphetamine empire, but a personality assembled from the stolen fragments of the dead. In his quest to become someone, Heisenberg, he essentially became no one. He became merely an echo, a collage of his victims. And in this lies the greatest irony and tragedy of his journey. When he says goodbye to Skylar in the finale, she says she doesn't want to hear again that he did it all for the family. And then he utters the most honest line of the entire series.
I did it for me. I liked it. I was good at it. And I was alive.
He is not talking about Walter White, the chemistry teacher. The I he speaks of is that very composite monster he built. He liked being a collection of ghosts, and that makes his fall one of the most complete and terrifying in history.